It's a pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this afternoon because she's not only responsible for this lecture, but she's responsible for this entire program. As MESDA's new Director of Museum Programs, April Strader Bullin is a graduate of all three MESDA Summer Institutes, having dedicated herself over 3 years to going in-depth and learning the decorative arts of the backcountry and the low country and the Chesapeake, and now taking over our programming calendar that includes overseeing the MESDA Summer Institute, working with all the students, find programs and seminars like this. It's worth noting that this lecture actually grew out of April's MESDA Summer Institute project when she was a student in the Chesapeake Summer Institute a couple of years ago. And what's so great about April is that not only is she organized, synchronized, putting everything together with beautiful precision, but she's, as you will see, she is both a lady and a scholar. April Strader Bullin.
Well, thank you, Robert. That was very kind. It is my pleasure today to share this project with you. My lecture is not going to be quite so long. I decided that I think I can tell you what I know in a short period of time. So we're going to take a look at the Chesapeake area, specifically Richmond and Petersburg. When Thomas Chippendale published The Gentleman and Cabinet Maker's Director in London in 1754, it took only months for its influence to be seen among the cabinet makers of the American colonies. Chippendale effectively combined the most desirable elements of Rococo, Chinese, and Gothic to create a distinctive style, one that appealed to both the affluent in England and here in the colonies. Thomas Chippendale presented an aesthetic rationale for new pieces, like the breakfast table, the sideboard table, and the china table, which were crucial for the rituals and foodways of the mid-century gentry. In colonial Virginia, the gentry and middle class quickly embraced Chippendale's fresh ideas. Commercial and agricultural growth in mid-century Virginia spurred a new wave of consumerism that profoundly shaped the exteriors and interiors of Virginian homes, as witnessed by the spate of new multi-story, architecturally intricate estates that were built in the 1750s and 60s, and by the rush from elite Virginians to buy English-produced and locally produced versions of the Chippendale style. A Chippendale-inspired sideboard table in the MESDA collection was discovered in Chesterfield County, Virginia, just south of Richmond and west of Petersburg. In fact, it's safe to say that its form was derived directly from plate 56 in Chippendale's 1754 book. Examination of this table revealed an accomplished maker, working solely in walnut. He followed the Chippendale pattern with preciseness, the cyma molding just underneath the top, the small bead of molding skirting the apron, and the graceful chamfering of the inner corners of the leg. But the cabinet maker also adapted Chippendale's design. He created a fine bead on the outer corner of the legs and a very distinct quatrefoil bracket. What influenced the table's maker to incorporate such diversions from Chippendale's original design? Where did he gain the confidence to move beyond the expected into his own aesthetic statement? The distinct quatrefoil bracket knot is one of the most intriguing features on this table. As you can see, it is a flat object. However, I would argue that its appearance is quite dimensional, with the elements appearing to weave over and under each other in order to form what I am calling a knot. On a recent visit to MESDA, Adam Bowett, British furniture historian, identified this quatrefoil knot as a Scottish feature. To support his determination of a Scottish origin for the design, Bowett cited a chair in the collection of the National Museum of Antiquities of Scotland with a quatrefoil knot in the backsplat. In fact, that chair is recorded in the MESDA object database. And you probably wonder, how in the world is a chair from Scotland in the MESDA object database? Because we cover Southern things. Well, the reason is there was a project in 1981 that was sponsored by the Kaufman Americana Foundation of Norfolk, Virginia, that focused on the British influence on American furniture. And it was conducted by Brad Rauschenberg, and Brad traveled to Europe and determined to take lots of photographs of things that he felt, would show that influence. And this chair happened to be one of the things that he photographed. Another version of this quatrefoil knot appears in a circa 1759 writing table, a mahogany writing table, that is attributed to Alexander Peter, a Scottish wright involved in furnishing Dumfries House in Scotland. Now, Peter, a lesser-known contemporary of Thomas Chippendale, worked as a cabinet maker for over 50 years and was responsible for a significant collection of documented furniture surviving today. While the quatrefoil knot is not inherent to the Scots, it appears as a desired ornament on Scottish furniture. In the Chesapeake region of the American South, the use of the quatrefoil knot can be seen on the furniture of 3 identified colonial and antebellum cabinet makers who were born in Scotland: Robert Walker of Fredericksburg, Virginia, John Shaw of Annapolis, Maryland, and John Shearer of Martinsburg, Virginia. Collectively, these 3 cabinet makers used that design between 1735 and 1818, spanning some 83 years. No other ethnic group in America during this period has been associated with the quatrefoil knot design, at least on furniture. Could the maker of this sideboard have been Scottish as well? It is important to note that the Scots were influencing early America, and to consider why this particular group of immigrants would fit the profile of a cabinet maker who might decide to color outside the lines just a little bit when it came to Chippendale's design ideas. Now let's remember, Scotland went through several periods of upheaval. The uncertainty and turmoil that pervaded everyday life led thousands of Scots from every economic level to migrate to America between 1718 and 1775. Of those, 75,000 departed the seaports in the west of Scotland. Already by the 1720s, the number of immigrants suggested to English novelist Daniel Defoe that soon Virginia may be rather called a Scots than an English plantation. The Scots often encountered prejudice in their new home, but the hostility and indifference did little to deter these proud, resourceful people who came seeking material successes and gained support from their families, their clans, and their traditions. Some wished only to keep their own customs. Others thought more of the promise of a happiness which eluded them at home. By the early 18th century, Scots took important governmental, religious, and social roles in Virginia. Good examples were the Crown's highest-ranking official in the colony, Lieutenant Governor Alexander Spotswood, and James Blair, rector of Bruton Parish Church in Williamsburg, who was the founder and first president of the College of William and Mary and the commissary of the Bishop of London to Virginia. Together, Blair and Spotswood stood at the apex of a wide and diverse network of Scots in Virginia. The presence of this wide network expanded the possibility that objects related to this MESDA sideboard could be located. Research in the MESDA object database identified a second sideboard, almost identical to the one in the collection. An April 1928 advertisement in Antiquarian magazine documented this sideboard offered for sale by J.K. Beard of Richmond. This sideboard table included the same quatrefoil knots, but also added elaborate fluting along the front surface of all 4 of the legs. Further coming of the MESDA object database turned up a breakfast table in the collection of Colonial Williamsburg. Excuse me. Oh, I did skip that one. You can see here the knots and the fluting and the comparison between the 2 tables. Now, the breakfast table in the Colonial Williamsburg collection. Again, here you have those same quatrefoil knots And you've got that bead down the outside corner of the leg. The circa 1770 table was acquired for the Wythe House from Mr. Ahern in Richmond, Virginia. This breakfast table, though, included an uncommon support for the leaves, a loper or drawbar encased in a yellow pine box attached to the underside of the top. A corresponding opening in the side apron then allows that bar to be pulled out to support the leaf. Why in the world a cabinet maker decided to do this instead of using a traditional support, which was a hinged bracket, really isn't known. With these discoveries, though, it appeared that a group of furniture with similar characteristics clustered around the James River in Chesterfield, Henrico, and Prince George County. The box loper that we see here added a new element to the list of characteristics, and with that, the group began to grow. A second breakfast table, the second breakfast table, here we go. This one, a 1775 example, was also in the Colonial Williamsburg collection and was identified by Ron Hurst and Jonathan Brown in Southern Furniture, and this particular piece joined that group. The table had the same support system for the leaves, as you can see here. However, it lacked the brackets and the bead down the legs. Attributed to Petersburg, Virginia, this table had a history of ownership in the Harrison family of Prince George County. In Jonathan Brown's article, A Cultural Analysis of Furniture Making in Petersburg, Virginia, he identifies still a third table. Now, this table has that same unusual support system for the leaves, and it also includes a simplified bracket. The table has a history in the Ruffin family of Prince George County, Virginia. And in Brown's description of this table, he states that the use of this sliding battens to support the leaves is characteristic of Petersburg cabinet makers. Now, thanks to my colleague at Colonial Williamsburg, Tara Chakurta, I was alerted to the existence of a fourth breakfast table. It appeared at an auction at Jeffrey S. Evans in November of 2014. And here it is, and I'd like to say I did not put it on here, but thank you to Jeff for this photograph. It's courtesy of his auction house. And this example, which was previously owned by Colonial Williamsburg, that's why Tara alerted me to that, was acquired for the museum when they purchased it from Virginia Crumpler of Colonial Heights, Virginia, and that was done in around 1940. Now, for those of you who might not know, Colonial Heights is part of the modern-day Greater Richmond region, which includes Richmond and Petersburg. It, too, has the unusual support system, as we'll see here, for the leaves, as well as the bead down the outside corner of the legs and the chamfer on the inside corner. Lacking on this are any type of bracket or quatrefoil knot. These 6 tables share stylistic and structural relationships, such as a knot or quatrefoil bracket, wooden boxes underneath the top that conceal and confine the lopers for the leaves, and legs with a chamfer on the inner quarter and a bead the entire length of the outer corner. The strong ties that bind these tables together suggest that this is a group of colonial furniture that can be associated with the adjoining counties of Henrico, Chesterfield, and Prince George. This constitutes the earliest defined group of colonial furniture associated with the cities of Richmond and Petersburg and the surrounding area. So, is there a cabinet maker who can be associated with this grouping of tables? As previously discussed to date, the only furniture makers in the Chesapeake region known to have employed the quatrefoil knot on their work were born in Scotland. You see examples of their work here again and circled areas where that knot appears. This, to me, would increase the likelihood that the maker of these tables was of Scottish descent. So I started combing the MESDA databases again. And with that, while tracing the objects through their locations of Richmond, Chesterfield County, and Petersburg, and then looking at documented cabinet makers in the MESDA Craftsman database, I was actually presented with about 20 cabinet makers working in the area between 1760 and 1775. After filtering that list to identify only those cabinet makers who would meet the criteria set forth by the objects, one strong possibility emerged: George Donald. George Donald was born in 1731 in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, and lived in Richmond, Virginia from 1757 until his death in 1776. He was first identified as a cabinet maker in a 1761 apprenticeship indenture for Joseph Scott. Like many Scots, George Donald made alliances through marriage or business dealings with gentry planter families. He married Dorothea Jones, whose family was well placed in Virginia society. He was a cousin of Patrick Henry, as documented in a letter to Henry from Donald's sister Margaret, where she refers to him as cousin. And then she proceeds, "Allow me to put you in mind that I am still numbered among the living and would be very happy to hear of you." So apparently, Mr. Henry had not been very consistent with his correspondence. Donald's work is also associated with Thomas Jefferson. He was mentioned in Jefferson's memoranda book on June 25, 1757, in regard to a legal matter. Additionally, Jefferson notes the 1761 of Joseph Scott, which we just mentioned, which, interestingly enough, was witnessed by Martin Eventon, a cabinet maker and master builder from Chesterfield County. Now, I'll interject here that Robert and I kind of talked about this yesterday. Martin Eventon kind of moved around a bit. He seemed to have problems where he went, maybe money problems or other types of issues. So he not only was in Chesterfield County, but he also was in Henrico County for a period of time. And I think he ends up in King William County toward the end of his venture, and especially when there is a signed desk, which also appears in Southern Furniture with Martin's signature on it. So it's interesting that he has that connection, that cabinet maker connection to him, and that Jefferson has noted this. Then on June 9th, in 1769, Jefferson records that he wrote to Donald and provided directions or dimensions for a reading desk. Donald's reading desk is in the collection at Monticello. Examination of this desk revealed that it had similar style characteristics to the sideboard table in the MESDA collection, with the exception of the brackets. However, during the 1980s, restoration of these brackets caused them to, look for a pattern that would suit the object and the date. And so they used the same bracket that is actually on that plate, plate 56, that we looked at earlier. So that explains why the brackets are this type of bracket and maybe not a knot. We really don't know what they were exactly. The desk does have, though, the chamfered legs with the bead that extends down the outer corner, and there is an additional smaller medial bead added to the front legs of the slide-out writing surface. So when all these elements are taken into consideration, the Monticello reading desk must be considered as the seventh member of the group. It strongly supports their attribution to the Richmond cabinet-making shop of George Donald. Donald was well connected in Richmond for 19 years. He took apprentices between the years of 1761 and 1769. He employed 3 of them during that time, including Joseph Fontaine, Richard Holland, and Joseph Scott, who we mentioned earlier. The longevity of his work was probably extended through the shop of his apprentice, Richard Holland, who was recorded in the MESDA database as a cabinet maker working in Richmond later on, between the dates of 1793 and 1804. Without a signature or an account book, it is impossible to positively identify the maker of the MESDA sideboard table and the other objects in this group. The one exception lies with Thomas Jefferson's reading desk. Jefferson's memorandum books records the order for the desk from George Donald, and there is no reason to suspect that Donald is not the maker of the desk now in the collection of Monticello, and his shop is likely the influence for all the tables in this group. What can be confirmed is that the influence of colonial Scottish cabinet makers can be seen for the first time in the Richmond and Petersburg area, and that these 7 tables constitute the first identified group of colonial furniture from that area. Historians have accepted the impact of Scottish ways on American politics and culture for over a decade. As we ponder the influence of the Scots on colonial America's decorative arts, Daniel Defoe's statement that Virginia may be rather called a Scots than an English plantation causes us to consider that 18th century Virginia was indeed more influenced by Scots than previously considered, and that Scottish design traditions played an important role in colonial Virginia cabinet making. And now, with the discovery of this early group of colonial furniture, that cultural and material influence can be seen further south in Virginia than ever before. Thank you.